So, welcome to our seminar on public opinion and BRICS. It's a pleasure to be able to participate in this event that arrives in its fifth edition. It's the first day, and the fifth BRICS conference will run until Friday with seminars on how environment and sustainability, new development bank, female leadership in BRICS, global health and BRICS, among others. For this seminar, the speakers will be Ivan Lopes Fernandes and Paulo Velasco. Gebrex, thank you for acceptance of the invitation and for the contribution to this event. I will summarize their great curriculums. Ivan has a bachelor's degree in international relations, master's and PhD in political science from the University of São Paulo, professor of public policy at the Federal University of ABC since 2015. He was a visiting researcher at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, United States, 2012. He is the current vice coordinator of the graduate program in public policy. He is also coordinator of the Foreign Media Policy Observatory at SEBRAP, Brazilian Center for Analysis and Planning. Paulo holds a PhD in political science from the Institute of Social and Political Studies of UERJ. Holds a master's in international relations from the Institute of International Relations of the Pontifical Catholic University of Rio de Janeiro, and a degree in law from State University of Rio de Janeiro. He is currently adjunct professor of international policy at UERJ and coordinator of the postgraduate program International Relations, where he is a part of the permanent body. He also works as a professor at the MBA International Relations at Fundação Getúlio Vargas. Each speaker will have up to 35 minutes for your lecture, and after this, we will open to questions, which can be sent by form. We will start with Paulo Velasco. Good luck, Paulo, and thanks again.
Thank you very much, Vinicius. I'm pretty honored to be here. It's a great pleasure to take part in the conference and accepting the kind invitation. Today, we're going to talk about public opinion in Brazil, especially related to the BRICS group. I'll try to discuss with you how Brazilian people understands not only the BRICS group and the project in itself, but understands the Brazilian foreign policy at all. What's the relation between Brazilian society and Brazilian public opinion and Itamaraty, that's our foreign minister, and Brazilian diplomacy, considering history and considering in special the moment that we are living in the last years, considering Bolsonaro's government especially. It's quite difficult to start defining what's a public opinion. There are several definitions, different definitions across literature. I'll start my sharing my presentation with you with some general ideas on public opinion that we can take as a start point here for our discussion tonight. Well, here you have my email. If you have any doubts, we can go further in our discussion later. So you want to take down the email there. Well, general ideas here on public opinion. The first one is that, of course, when what we consider as public opinion is an aggregate of individual attitudes or beliefs, and that's why polls in many areas, especially in political science, that's my field, they try to measure the public opinion, the ideas, the beliefs, the attitudes of people, of individual or of groups related to some issues, to some matters, to some questions Always when we talk about a public opinion, we are talking about an aggregate of individual attitudes or beliefs. Of course, public opinion can be considered a foundation of democracy. This is something very, very important. And this, of course, does not mean that there is no public opinion in autocratic regimes. We can find, of course, public demonstrations and the position of society against some attitudes, some measures that are carried out by dictatorships. So there is also public opinion in non-democratic states and non-democratic governments. But when we talk about public opinion, in general, we consider public opinion as a foundation of democracy. And this is a very important idea. And in some cases, and this is very, very important, when we can find a very active public opinion that take part in some way in proposing some ideas, in taking part in some decisions, this shows, of course, that the public opinion has more to say and have more impact in the policies that are carried out and in politics in that state. When we compare, for instance, Brazil and the United States, we can say without any doubt that public opinion in the United States has much more impact in foreign policy than we have in Brazil. In Brazil, only for the last 2 or 3 decades, we can find a more active public opinion, a society that tries to engage more and more in political matters and political issues, even in foreign policy and diplomacy. But comparing to the United States, there we find a public opinion that's much more active than in Brazil. In order to understand what is the United States foreign policy, we have to take into account public opinion. In Brazil, we don't do that, at least not till now. It's not very common to take into account the public opinion on foreign policy in order to understand what is going on in Brazilian diplomacy. So there is a big difference here between Brazil and the United States. In the United States, we have to take a look at the lobbies, we have to take a look at the media, we have to take a look at public opinion. In Brazil, it's not like that, at least not for the time being. Okay. Another point I want to stress here in the general ideas, considering public opinion, is of course a private opinion can become a public opinion. And this can be done today, for instance, through social media. So whenever a private opinion of a group or of individuals becomes public, when individuals take some type of action to express its opinion to others publicly, for instance, through social media, through social networks, then that private opinion can be considered part of a public opinion. These are just some general ideas, just to get started here. As I said before, there is no a unique definition of public opinion. There are several definitions across literature that we can take into account here in our discussion. Further on, well, it's very important to consider that general public, they actually believe that leadership, governments, they should pay attention to popular opinion. So any society or general public, they want and they dream of the idea that the governments and leaderships will take their opinion into account, even though they do not take part directly in decision procedures. They are not decision makers. Society is not a decision maker, at least not in general, but they think that their opinion has to be taken into account by decision makers, by policymakers, in order to reflect their preferences. So the policies that should be carried out, that should be taken, decisions that should be taken, they have to take into account the opinion and the preferences of people and the general public. This is another idea that we can relate to public opinion, but take a look here, and I highlighted leaders themselves. They think quite differently from that. So they are less likely to believe this. Much leaders, they simply ignore public preferences and popular opinion. As I said, in some cases, like in Brazil, foreign policy throughout history, throughout decades, has not taken in any measure the preferences of the public or of the society. We're going to talk about this a little bit later, but in Brazil, we have a very strong and insulated foreign minister, that's Itamaraty, that is not simply doesn't want to take any kind of dialogue with society, with social representatives. Even today, we can consider that Brazilian diplomats, they don't actually they don't feel comfortable in having to negotiate or even simply to listen to NGOs. We are in a few days, we will start the COP26 in Glasgow, talking about climate change. And in the last few months, our diplomats, they had to talk to NGOs in order to measure their worries, their preferences. They had to talk to the private sector, to companies. But this is something that Brazilian diplomats, they are not used to do. They simply don't like to do this. In the last few years, this is changing, but we have a long way ahead in order to achieve, for instance, the position of the United States, where much of the foreign policy is done in the Congress, listening to lobbies and to public opinion, media. Mass media has a very important role in the United States in order to have an impact on decisions that are taken, measures that are adopted, policies that are carried out. In Brazil is still, for the time being, quite different from that. Another point we can find here in our second slide is that not only leaders, they are not likely to understand what are public preferences, but the idea of the public opinion is to set limits on government action. So public opinion may be at its strongest capacity in order to prevent politicians from, for instance, adopting or promoting some unpopular policies. So this is another important way to understand public opinion. They have to gather in order to achieve strength that's enough to prevent governments of adopting any policy that may go against their interests or may be considered in some way an unpopular policy. So the public opinion not only may have an impact on decisions taken, but may be used as a way to set limits and bounds to public action and to government policies. Another general idea here, we can say that when public opinion changes drastically, government policy is much more likely to change as well. And this is something that may happen in some areas, in some issues. for instance, in foreign policy. Maybe something may happen, for instance, a terrorist attack. Media may have some kind of focus on an issue that may promote a big change in the way public opinion understands that issue. We all have heard about, for instance, a CNN effect. So the way mass media understands and follows some events and some challenges and some issues like terrorism, may provoke changes in the way public opinion understands that issue, that matter, and this may provoke changes as well in government policies. Okay. And the big question, in order to take a look at Brazil and to get closer to the point of our seminar today or tonight here, is, does public opinion matter? The traditional view is no. We can take a look, for instance, at the Almo-Lipman consensus, the famous, the notorious Almo-Lipman consensus, that's being challenged for the last years. But for a long time, this was the idea, and the public opinion was not taken into account, at least not that much. And what the Almo-Lipman consensus said is that public opinion was uninformed, volatile, and lacked incoherence. So lacking incoherence was a big problem. The fact of being volatile, changing preference very, very fast. The problem of being uninformed, ignorance was something related also to public opinion. Now I'll share with you the slide here. You have so the general idea, the traditional idea is this one. Public opinion is not important, and we will not take it into account, especially in state matters, in state policies like security and defense, foreign policy, and so on. And I highlighted as well the idea that we can relate to Almond-Lipman consensus. Even if leaders followed public opinion, they would have no way of knowing what direction to go. This is the traditional view of public opinion, because exactly considering that public opinion changes a lot and is unstable, volatile, and so on and so forth. Well, another point very important to take into account here in order to understand a little bit the traditional view of public opinion is considering the role of the elites. The elite theory, the famous elite theory in political science, understands that public opinion is shaped by the elites. So the elites, they define the way public opinion will understand the challenges, the issues, and the several subjects taken into account. So it's a top-down process. It's the elites, they will decide the way the public opinion will understand or interpret any matter and any issue. And modern elites, they shape citizen thinking. This is something very important. The idea of being top down, something guided by the elites, the intellectual elites, the economic elites, through, for instance, media. Media is considered a very valuable means of influencing and shaping citizen thinking. Politicians, of course, policymakers, and the point, the main point here is that citizens, they must be exposed to the message and must be open to it. So since we consider, as we said before, that public opinion is uninformed, is volatile, it would be very easy to guide them, to influence them, to shape the way they think and the way they understand the several issues important to the state. Um, and now getting closer to Brazil, we have to talk about Brazil, not only the general literature on public opinion. We are not talking about the United States today, so the Almo-Lipton consensus is less important when we are talking about Brazil, and it's something very closely related to the United States. But in order to understand a little bit what's going on in Brazil and the way we can consider Brazilian foreign policy, how Brazilian foreign policy is decided, how Brazilian foreign policy is carried out, we can, for instance, consider as our starting point, this is our starting point here, that we have a very, very strong foreign minister. Itamaraty, as it's called here in Brazil, is a very strong ministry here. And we can talk about, I highlighted here this idea that there is a bureaucratic insulation, at least throughout history. This is changing a little bit in the last 2 or 3 decades. This is important to point out and to stress. It's not the same as 50 or 100 years ago. We are improving in order to establish more dialogue between Itamaraty and Brazilian society. There is a better relation between Itamaraty on the one side and society on the other side. But we can talk we can still talk about a strong bureaucratic insulation. And this is a big challenge. This is a big challenge because Itamaraty was always considered a ministry formed by an elite, bureaucrats, very well prepared, with technique to decide what was national interest related to the world, related to international issues, and only them were capable of achieving and deciding the better way to act, and they only them were capable of understanding the challenges we had to face, the problems that we had to tackle. This bureaucracy in the Weberian way of understanding this. We can go back to Max Weber, the idea of bureaucracy, bureaucracy against politics, bureaucracy formed by a body well prepared with a lot of technique in order to promote policies and to tackle problems and challenges. This was the general idea about Itamaraty throughout history. So we can talk about bureaucratic insulation here. Of course, a highly qualified diplomatic service, even when we consider other states in our region here in Latin America, it was very common to hear that El Itamaraty no improvisa. El Itamaraty no improvisa. What's that? Itamaraty does not improvise. Itamaraty is always formed by a high qualified diplomatic service with a lot of technique, and they understand exactly what to do, what to decide, acting in a very pragmatic way, not in a passionate way, but in a pragmatic way, considering all the challenges involved, all the risks involved. That's why Itamaraty does not improvise. That was the general idea, considering Brazil very closely related to the logic of a traditional bureaucratic insulation in Itamaraty. And the point I stress here is that this has to change. This is something that may change in the near future. It's very important to bridge the gap between Itamaraty and the society. Itamaraty has to reflect better and better the preference of Brazilian society. We have to consider, for instance, that foreign policy is not only a state policy, but also a public policy. This is very important. Foreign policy can be considered and has to be considered as well as a public policy, not only a state policy. So we have to, in some way, to go apart from the Weberian way to understand the state, the Weberian way to understand bureaucracy, in order to consider that our diplomats, they have to get along with society, with NGOs, with the private sector, with companies. They have to listen to their demands. They have to listen to their preferences in order to decide what really reflects in a broader way our national interests. This is very, very important. Okay. Another idea that we have to take into account here, to bear in mind, is that exactly because of the traditional bureaucratic insulation of Itamaraty, we still have a democratic deficit in Brazilian foreign policy. We still have a democratic deficit. We are improving, we are getting better in the last 2 decades, but we have a long way ahead, as I said before. Besides that, and according to that as well, in Brazil, most prominent media vehicles, they have very limited agenda setting capacity. This is something quite different from the US. We have to take this into account as well. In the US, the mass media, the most prominent vehicles, mass vehicles, they have a great impact on several policies, even in foreign policy. In Brazil, it's not like that. In Brazil, even when you take into account, for instance, Globo, that's the greatest one we have in Brazil, the most important one, the richest one, the impact of Globo in our foreign policy is very, very small. If we can consider if there exists any impact. Probably there's no impact, no way. Okay, so this idea, it's important. It's very important to consider that. And already talking about BRICS, there is a great skepticism about BRICS. This general idea, we can find this in most of the Brazilian newspapers, TV news broadcasting channels. We can consider that there prevail a great skepticism about BRICS. The common view, look here, the common view is that BRICS countries, they do not get along very well. They have very little in common between them. They are only loosely associated. Look at this, BRIC countries, Brazil, Russia, India, South Africa, China, they have very little in common. They come from different regions with different traditions, different language. There are some problems that are common to all of them, but the idea is that the idea of the mass media is that they are still only loosely associated and connected without an important agenda in common. And despite the rhetoric of cooperation, and despite yearly summits, we have yearly summits since 2009. There was the first summit in Ekaterinburg in Russia. In Brazil, we already had 3 summits. In Brasilia 2010, in Fortaleza 2014, in Brasilia again 2019. Despite the return of cooperation, despite the existence of yearly summits, the group lacks substance. This is the general idea that we can find in Brazilian media about BRICS. So there is a great skepticism about BRICS in Brazilian media. This is a very curious thing that happened a few years ago in 2016. José Serra was our foreign minister, was the boss of Itamaraty by that time. He's not a career diplomat. He's a Brazilian senator. But he was by that time our foreign minister. And in an interview, he simply didn't know the members of the BRIC. Imagine this, our foreign minister in 2016, during Temer government, he didn't know exactly the name of the states that took part in the BRICS group. During the interview, he said Argentina, considering that Argentina was part of the group. Maybe some of you remember this interview. And this is a very well point to stress the idea that if the foreign minister is not very close to what's the BRICS group, what represents, what are the ideas, imagine, let alone the Brazilian society in general, let alone the public opinion in general, okay? So this is an important example here. Going further, and Vinicius, I'm about to finish my presentation here, trying to stick to the time. We can say that there is a lot of prejudice and ignorance today in Brazil, not only about BRICS, but about our foreign relations. And I understand, this is my personal view, that Brazil is getting worse and worse in this because of the polarization that we are witnessing in the last years here. We are a very, very polarized country today, between left and right and far right and maybe far left. And this is terrible, not only for democracy, but this is terrible for greater participation of society in public issues, in public policies, even in foreign policy. As we will know, and as we all know, Bolsonaro's government has an anti-China rhetoric. And I put this, I highlight this in the slide. A strong, a deep anti-rhetoric, anti-China rhetoric. In some moments, these shrink a little bit. For instance, a few months before the BRICS summit in Brazil in 2019, relations got a little bit better. We had the vice president going to China. We had the president going to China, and things got a little bit better by that time. But right after, in 2020, because of the pandemic, then things worsened again, and they are worsening till now. Many government representatives, they criticize China. Some important politicians in Brazil, closely related to the president, like his son, that's a federal congressman. He accused China of being the responsible because of the pandemic, the Chinese virus, simply repeating some sentences that were said by Donald Trump by the time. This is terrible. This is terrible for our foreign relations with China. That's our major trade partner, as we know. Since 2009, China is our greatest trade partner. But it's just terrible for BRICS as well, because China is part of BRICS and Russia is part of BRICS. And the anti-communism feeling that prevail in part of Brazilian society, in those who support Bolsonaro and have no idea what's the world, what is international relations, they tend to understand The BRICS group is a communist association that may challenge our traditions, our principles, like democracy, like human rights, like anything. And when we take a look, when we take a picture of the BRICS, and we understand that there are some states like China and Russia, this has nothing to do with us. And those supporters of Bolsonaro's government, they represent like 25-30% of Brazilian society, maybe today, still, let's see next year during the elections, but maybe. And they prefer getting closer to Europe or to the United States, not to non-Western states. There is a very conservative view. This picture is in one of the demonstrations we had in Brasilia this year. People carrying the Israel flag, the United States flag, and Brazilian flag. We have nothing to do with many of the issues that relate to Israel or even to the United States. We have very different challenges in foreign policy. We have nothing to do with their biggest challenge. But this is the way some people in Brazil see the world. We want to be side by side with the United States, with Israel, with European states. Brazil is a Western state and has nothing to do with China or Russia or India or South Africa. This is not the foreign policy that we prefer. And they understand that the BRICS was created by the government of the PT, the Labor Party in Brazil, Lula da Silva administration, and everything that was done by the PT in government was awful and was terrible for our interests and went against our traditions. And Brazil was becoming a new Venezuela. Remember this? During the elections in 2019, and we had to avoid this. And Brazil was becoming a communist state, and getting closer to China or to the BRICS is a way to become a communist state. So there is, as I said, a lot of prejudice and ignorance within this polarized Brazil. Okay. These are my final remarks. Vinicius, sorry about passing a little bit my time, but I'll be open at the end for some questions of the audience if there is any question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paulo, for incredible lecture. It's a good class for public opinion and BRICS, and his reflections are important to our discussion. After Ivan talking about public opinion and BRIC, Ivan had connection issues in the beginning, but now I think everything is okay. Okay, Ivan? Okay.
I hope so.
Ivan, now you have 35 minutes. And thank you, Paulo. You stay in 35 minutes exactly.
Great, even better than I thought. Yeah, good.
Very good. And Ivan, now you can start. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Vinicius, for the invitation to present our work here in the Gebrex conference. Thanks a lot, Paulo, for your brilliant presentation. We learned a lot about public opinion and about foreign policy in Brazil. And I will have the trouble to speak after you. But I think that our presentations will be very closely related because you give us a very broad presentation about the matter of public opinion on foreign policy, the almond lipid ban consensus, and right now we are working with public opinion data on international politics and foreign policy in Brazil, and we are going to present a piece of our work on that subject. Let's put on the screen that one. No, that one here. Sure. No, it's the wrong one. Let's find the right one. Oh, stop. some. Oh, how can I stop the presentation right now? I choose the wrong, I stopped sharing, I choose the wrong file. Let's put on presentation. Now it works. Here, that's good. I think you are all watching, seeing our first slide. It's the paper that's going to be published in Revista Brasileira de Política Internacional, that have the name BRICS and Brazilian Public Opinion, Soft Balancing or Economic Strategy. I am working with Vinicius in this piece. So Vinicius is also the co-author of our presentation with Janino Nuc from the International Relations Institute of the University of São Paulo. And what we are doing here is to try to put some data on the information or the theoretical expectations that we have about public opinion, because different than US, that they have a lot of data on public opinion since the mid of the 20th century, we have almost no data on that in Brazil, mainly related with international politics and foreign policy. If we are interested in internal politics, we'll have more data. For the elections, there are a lot of institutes that are making and collecting information about that, but we don't have much information about foreign policy. We don't have much information about BRICS. And our group in the SEBRAP, from the project Brazil, the Americas, and the World, we are trying to collect this information, try to understand how is structured Brazilian public opinion. Right now, we are in the first step of the American rejection of the Alman-Lippmann consensus, that is between the 70s and the 80s, there are a lot of work that say, oh, people doesn't know a lot about foreign policy issues, but those public opinion have structures. They have coherence. And right now we have just published a paper in the Latin America Research Review with Feliciano Sá Guimarães from International Relations Institute of USP and with Maria Hermínia Tavares de Almeida, that we show how, when we look on the data of the 2014 survey and the 2019 survey, the structure of the public opinion is quite the same. So we have some information that can say, oh, I think that we can understand what is happening in public opinion. I think the next step for the next decade is to realize if this public opinion has an effect on foreign policy making. We know that there is a pluralization of foreign policy making since the democratization, since the second part of the second part of the Lula's administration. There are more interest groups trying to participate, pressuring. There was a huge debate about foreign policy in the case of Venezuela, on the case of Brazilian relations with Cuba. Right now, in the case of Brazilian relations with China, I agree with Paulo's point that those debates are a little crazy right now, but these are part of democracy. But we don't know actually with those variations in public opinion has an effect on foreign policy making. So we are trying to, first in this paper is a presentation of that to show that there is a structure. The people have quite very nice thoughts about public foreign policy in Brazil. And the next step, I think in the next decade, and Paulo is totally invited to help us in this project to understand if there is any effect on that. I cannot say anything on this direction. We are not going to say anything that public opinion is affecting the Brazilian policy for BRICS, but we will say that there is some coherence in the policies that are being promoted with the BRICS coalition and how public opinion sees these coalitions. This is what we are going to show for you on the next few minutes. Here, I think it's more about how it's very, the literature is very thin on the subject. There is a very interesting book for Oliver Stunkel about BRICS, but he is not working with public opinion. He's actually descriptively working with how the coalition evolves around the 2 last decades. There are just 2 studies besides ours that try to understand relations between public BRICS and public opinion. There is a piece of Amancio Oliveira and Janino Dux, and there is a very nice piece from Urdines and Daniela Campello that shows how the China trade shocks affect the attitudes of citizens on municipalities that lose a lot of jobs due to China trade shocks, and the legislators that are close related with those municipalities. Those actually, it's not municipalities, they are working with micro regions, but besides Oliveira and Nuke and Urdines and Campello, there are no other piece on public opinion on BRICS. So I think we are going to present a very important outlook for this relation to further we understand if there is an impact of public opinion on decisions that Brazil make about BRICS. All our data is available on our site, lasamericas.github.io/Sebrap. It's a very nice, I'm very proud about that. We were able to produce a very nice website. So if you can look there, we have a lot of information. We are working right now in the Brazilian and the American, the World project with data from public opinion, elites opinion, and from newspapers. And we are trying to understand how those things were related for the next step to see if they have a difference, they have an effect on policy making. So what we are going to present, first, the description of the evolution of Brazilian public opinion on BRICS and partners from BRICS. First of all, we will show that people doesn't know what's BRICS. It's not just Serra that doesn't know what is BRICS. The people doesn't know. Less than 5% of the people understands, can have a clue about what's BRICS. They can position it themselves after we say that BRICS is the organization that put those countries together. But we'll see how the public opinion evolutes from 2010 to 2019, but it was in January of 2019. It was not after the Bolsonaro revolution in Brazil. So I don't have data to say how was the impact of Bolsonaro's policies and public opinion on foreign policy. We can say that we have a very nice retract of the beginning of Bolsonaro's government. And after that, how those public opinion attitudes evaluates the emergence of China as an international power competing with the USA. And in the last part of our piece, we are going to understand what are the determinants of the positive evaluation of BRICS, using the literature of open economics to understand, to help us to understand what's going on the individual's mind, not just on the public opinion in general, but on each of the Brazilians that respond to our survey that is representative of the Brazilian population. But what we are going to work on, actually what we are going to show to you is that the idea of soft balance, that is a strong component on BRICS composition to produce a way of balancing, delaying, frustrating, the undermine the superpowers, unilateral policies. Those elements, they have track on Brazilian public opinion on BRICS. So we show that those that support BRICS are not the ones that are rejecting United States. Actually, people understand that the threats that China emergence poses to Brazil is not related with China itself, but is related with the fact that China is so powerful right now that she competes in a possible next Cold War, possible new Cold War in the next decade with China, with United States. So the threats are not related with China itself. The threats are related with the geopolitical of China emergencies. So we show that it's not anti-Americanism that is driving positive attitudes for the BRICS. We show that the citizens very different than the Olympic consensus. They can position themselves on matters of foreign policies. So we work with that idea. Does public opinion realize that BRICS can be a vector of change in global governance? And we'll show in our paper how much Brazilian society perceives the coalition as instance of soft balance through opposition to the great power. So we'll work on this presupposition with three premises. First of all, BRICS coalition is a coalition with sufficient strength to oppose the great powers in the game of international forces. BRICS has ability to counteract the great powers, and this feature of BRICS is taken as positive for Brazil. And support for an emerging economy or such a coalition is not taken as the expenses, and there's a typo here, of the support for great powers. So support for BRICS is not positively correlated with anti-Americanism or negative correlated with Americanism. If supported to United States is correlated with support or against the support to BRICS. We show that there is actually two different words. How people look for the American relations with Brazil and how people look on the BRICS partnership of Brazil. So there is some very interesting data. Right now, we are not be more theoretical. We will introduce a lot of data information for you. First of all, we have a question about how Brazilians evaluate the partners on a scale of 0 to 100. And we use Argentina and US as the two great partners of Brazil before China to compare how those opinions related. And we can see that the support for China, India, Russia, and South Africa is very close related with the support of Argentina and Brazil. It's something about 40% to 6%. Is the same that we can watch here on the BRICS partners in Brazil. If we look on the information about how people evaluate not the country, but the relations between Brazil and which of those countries, we'll see that actually they are very close related. Here, more important, the evaluation of Brazilian bilateral relations with China, it's very close, is very similar to the evaluation of Brazilian relations with United States. More or less something bigger than 10%, smaller than 15% of the people think that there is a threat on those countries. Something close to 70% thinks that they have a very good relations. It's a bilateral relation marked by friendship or partnership. And something very close to that in China. It's very, very interesting that the numbers is almost the same. Interesting that Brazil doesn't see China as a threat, Argentina as a threat, but as a rival. Perhaps is much more related with Libertadores than to foreign policy issues. That we don't know what people are thinking when you say the word rivalry for them. Perhaps there's much more relation about football than any other things on Brazilian relations with China. Instead, that the country that have the bigger threat in Brazil is Russia. It's something closer to 10-20%. Unfortunately, we just have the data for Russia and South Africa in 2019, so we cannot see that there is increasing or decreasing, or there is a strong stabilization as we could see for the other countries. Besides that, we ask also for, in the surveys of 2010, 2014, and 2018, January of 2009, how Brazil trusts the most. Which countries Brazil trusts the most of the ones that are in the United Nations Security Council. And you see that once more, the relations between China and US is very, very similar. Almost the same number, the same percentage of people that think that US is the most trustable country in the UN Security Council thinks that US is the least trustable country. Something very close happens to China. More or less than 13% of people think that China is the most trustable country in the United States Security Council, and something close to 18% thinks that China is the less trustable country. So once more, we have some information that shows that the Brazilians sees US in a very similar view of that they see China too. There is a special question about China and United States in the surveys of 2014 and 2019 that we ask if the feelings of Brazil is of trust or distrust, admiration or contempt. And once more, oh, sorry for that. Once more, those numbers are very close. Almost a little more than 30% of the people trust China, 30% of the people trust United States. Almost 60% of the people admires China, 64% of the people admires United States. Those numbers are really, really, really incredible. They are looking the two countries that have very different history, that have very different relations with Brazil in the same way. When we make a question directly related with the issues of the emergence of China as a global power. Unfortunately, we don't have the data for 2014 survey. We have the data on 2010 and 2019 surveys, but we have the data on economy for the three surveys. Once more, there is something very interesting. We see that the emergence of China is taken as a serious threat. At more or less 40% of the people thinks that the emergence of China is a threat, but more than almost 60% of the people think that it's positive that the Chinese economy is as important as the USA for Brazil. So what we can interpret for this data, there is a threat, but the threat is not related closely to China, is not about China, but it's about the geopolitical of two powers. And there is very important contributions that the emergence of China as a competitor to the United States can bring for Brazilian economy. So what the people are responding, even though they doesn't know what is BRICS, make a lot of sense. This is the first interpretation that we have on the data. The second one is that China is being evaluated in the equal foot as United States. So let's now look on the knowledge about the BRICS. That's what Paulo had just said. Nobody knows what's BRICS. On our survey in the 2014 wave, we asked to 181 respondents if they know the meaning of the acronym. Just 40% get it right, and just 10% try to say something about that. More than 90% doesn't have a clue about what is BRICS. When you look on the data on 2019, the same appears. Only 56 people got it right, and only 10% of the people try to respond. We are saying, I don't know, it's Africa do Sul, South Africa, or another country. I made a mistake, but I try. I have a clue about that. No, 90% doesn't have any clue about that. But after that, we explain for them what's BRICS. BRICS is the coalition with Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. So we asked for them in 2004 survey if they think that BRICS is a force capable of balancing the world power or an embarrassed alliance for Brazil. I will show for you the actual coding of those answers. You can have this data on our website, but what we asked is the BRICS a force that can balance all the world powers facing the traditional superpowers such as the US, Germany, and Japan? Or the other question that we made, the other option that the respondent could answer is the BRICS an imbalanced alliance with authoritarian countries such as Russia and China, or who present high levels of social exclusion, such as India and South Africa? So we show these two alternatives for the respondents, and almost we split our sample in three. 1/3 think that BRICS is a force capable of balancing world power. 1/3 think that BRICS is an imbalanced alliance. 1/3 didn't answer. In the survey of the 2009 wave, we separate these two questions. We ask with a Likert scale format, do you agree if BRICS being a force capable of balancing world power? Do you agree with the affirmation, BRICS is an embarrassing alliance? And we use the same words for those two questions. And there is another very interesting finding. Those two questions correlated. So those who think that BRICS is a force capable of balancing the world power are the same ones that think that BRICS is an embarrassing alliance. There is a very strong positive correlation. We expected that this correlation could be negative, that those that think that BRICS can be a part of soft balancing policies for Brazil don't think that BRICS is embarrassing alliance as they put Brazil together with authoritarian or very unequal countries. No, people that are looking for BRICS as positive also knows that BRICS can have problems. The coalition, the partners of the coalition have problems, have policy issues that brings for Brazilian foreign policy. So right now we are in this situation. We are going to work the determinants of those positive attitudes for BRICS. Vinicius, how much times I have to present the findings of the model findings of the paper?
10 minutes, almost 10 minutes.
That will be enough. Let's put it together once more. Presentation over here. So we look for the attitudes determinants of the BRICS, why people think that BRICS is positive, and we use the first question, take as positive if the respondent says that BRICS is a force capable of balancing world power, or looking for in the 2019 waves just for the first question. We didn't work with the second one. We test if people say that somewhat agree or strongly agree with the affirmation that BRICS is a force capable of balancing world powers. We look on the literature of open economic framework. There are a lot of tons of papers that work on these models. I will not strongly explain that. In the end of the history, open economic framework doesn't work to understand BRICS. Not economic explanations, not education as a measure, a proxy of skills, and not the logic of consumption that is very close related with Brazilian and Latin America's attitudes over trade policies, even the sectoral logic models of Ricardo Winning model. We will see that some ideological explanations have track. People that are more cosmopolitan, they have a strong support for BRICS. There are also the gender gap issue. There is a very consistent finding of the literature. Woman tends to be more protectionist. Woman tends to be less supported of political and economic integration. There are not many works that were able to disentangle why, paper by paper, find these intensity findings. There is a relation between political pessimism and support for BRICS, but it's not quite important for what we want to show you. And there is also there is no close relation between support for trade and globalization to support of BRICS. So here I will just run two very simple logistic regression models using those economic variables as education, income, and the sector that the respondent is working. For ideational variables, we will use a measure of ideology, a measure of party, asking who they vote in the presidential elections in 2014 and 2018, if they are cosmopolitan, if they think foreign ideas and immigrants are good things for Brazil, if they are pessimists, gender and age has an effect, but we don't care a lot about that, but just a control, and trade and globalization's control. What we found, the variables related with school is not working in the same direction of the open economics model. Those models indicate that as Brazil is not doesn't have economy that is strongly related with skilled workforce, probably those people that has less skills measured by education should support more economic integration, should support more political integration. It's not like that. We see that finding after finding that people that is more educated are more positive to BRICS. Probably is not related with economics, but more related with cosmopolitan attitudes. We find there's very interesting effect of gender. Men's have 1.5 or 0.3 in the final model chance of being positive to BRICS than women. That's something that in our group we are trying to disentangle. Why? There is paper by paper that we find this interesting gender effect. We don't have any relations with parties. The control parties are here. The baseline is the vote for PT, for Dilma in 2014, and for Fernando Haddad in 2018. There is an effect that the guy voted for a third party, but we doesn't know what that means. But in the final model, that the full model with all the variables, there are no effects here. We find a very strong relation about cosmopolitanism and support for BRICS. That is very close related to that ideas can have an effect on ideas. We cannot say what is driving each one. And we have some ideas about trade barriers. Those who are contrary to trade barriers also support more BRICS. Those who are more in favor of foreign investments also support more BRICS, but are in those same path that ideas promoting ideas. But the most important thing on this model, we present the data, but is to have some background variables and the attitudes on internal politics that we think that is first priorities for the respondents to control for the second part that we want to understand. If the support for America or United States is related with the support or negatively related with support for BRICS. So we use the international variables is the support for Chinese emergence, Chinese bilateral relations with Brazil, and support with USA, and also controls about others BRIC partners and how Brazilians evaluate the bilateral relations between each one of those countries with BRICS. So this is our most important results, findings from the analysis of trade attitudes. First of all, always we have a variable related to China that obviously they are multicollinear, that have a positive impact on attitudes, positive attitudes towards the BRICS in 2014 and 2019. For the first model is the favorable opinion about China on the scale from 0 to 100. In the model of 2019, the questions about the economic ascension of China. Those are very close, positively and strongly related with the favorable opinion towards BRICS. The effect here is not so big if you see the coefficient, but as the variable is measured from 0 to 100, and we have a lot of variations of this measure, if you take out the variation, all the impact, someone that thinks that his opinion from China is 0, for someone who thinks that his opinion from China is 100, this is a huge effect. And here also we have a huge effect. Those, I think, the economic ascension of China is positive, have 1.4 more chance of support BRICS than those that doesn't think like that. The variables related to the public opinion about USA, none have an effect in 2014 survey, none of them. We just put in the model the variables related with USA, none of which have an effect. When you use, the information on the 2019 survey, we find an effect that a favorable opinion to United States have a positive opinion on BRICS that is totally unexpected, that is not anti-Americanism, but a high evaluation of United States being related with a high evaluation of BRICS, but these effects goes away in the final model that we put together with other variables. And in the third part, we see that, of course, when Brazilians have a positive relation about other BRICS between Brazil and other BRIC partners, those have a positive effect on Brazilian attitudes towards BRICS. So we show not that the public opinion is driving policy, not that the policy is driving public opinion, but there is track. The soft balancing strategy have track on Brazilian public opinion. So in the end of the day, our most important conclusions. First of all, attitudes towards BRICS partners do not differ much from attitudes towards other relevant partners, Argentina and USA, the first part of our presentation. There is an alliance towards Russia. We need to work on what's the meaning of that. We don't know. It's a new path of research that we are going to go in the next years. There is a very similar feelings towards China when compared to US. This perception that China rise generates both a perception of threat, potential a new Cold War, but also a perception of opportunity, an economic alternative to the USA. So there is a very ambiguous view about the BRICS. China presents itself as a positive alternative to the American hegemony of on the international system in line with the soft balancing strategy. The ability of the BRICS to change the international system is not negatively correlated with the perception that the alliance with the authoritarian and equal countries is constraining. That's another important descriptive finding that we have in our service. The positive view of the BRICS is not the result of an anti-Americanism, but a self-observed relationship with the partners that make up the BRICS. So we see that in the end of the day, the soft balance strategy has track on the Brazilian opinions towards the BRICS, and about the open economics conclusion that there is a huge debate about that. Actually, the open economics model doesn't work to understand the Brazilians' opinion on BRICS. So that's all. thanks a lot, obrigado, spasiba in Russian, and I cannot say that in Chinese. I didn't work too much on this. So thanks a lot for your attention. I hope you enjoy it.
Oh, thank you very much. Other incredible lecture. And now we received a question from Punya Pretty. Oh, thank you, Punya Pretty. I think she's watching in, I think it's difficult to her because I think in India is very high, it's late to watching lecture, but thank you very much. Oh, I'll read. Oh, my question is from our speaker, that to what extent has public opinion changed with passage of the time? I think general, but our question, what extent has public opinion changed with passage of time?
We have some information about that. It's not much information that, unfortunately, in Brazil, we didn't collect early information on public opinion. We don't have the data. If you look on the American literature, it's just amazing. They have tons and tons of data that they can work on how the Americans are feeling about foreign policy since the 50s. We can just look on the information of the last decade. And what we saw is a very strong structure. Besides a lot of movement on Brazilian politics, we left from a very leftist consensus to something very populist, and there is no strong modifications on the data that we saw. We present some parts of our data. There's a lot of information on our project, and everybody is invited to work with this data. You just go to our website and download the data. But what we find in this paper and other pieces that we are working, that there is a strong stability in Brazilian public opinion towards foreign policy and towards foreign politics issues. But it's the information that we know for 1 decade. We cannot say something about that for half a century that Americans can say.
Oh, sorry. Paulo, can you talk about it?
No, I completely agree with Ivan. That's it. And in Brazil, we have been studying public opinion for a very few times, so we don't have a broader time to make this kind of comparisons of change and stuff. We are still starting in this area. Maybe in 50 years, we can say something better about this. How does public opinion change in Brazil? What are the factors that may impact on public opinion changing in Brazil? We have no idea yet.
Yeah. Could I ask a question for Paulo? So
sure.
If you,
Go ahead.
Well, you work a lot on foreign policy. I think that there is an important contribution on your lecture to think foreign policy as a public policy issues, as not a state policy. I'm from the Department of Public Policy on the Federal University of ABC, and I strongly agree with the idea that foreign policy is just as the other policies. I know that people from Itamaraty, the diplomats want to say something different because they want to preserve the foreign policy decisions for them and not for the rest of the society, the members and the interested groups, the public opinion, the academics, and all people that can talk about that. But how can we try to understand if the public opinion has an effect on foreign policy? That is a part of what we can do with the data on public opinion. We have the data of public opinion, but as the decisions on foreign policy, they are not quite so fast. There are a lot of slow movements, slow decisions. If you will look for example, of the Mercosur European Union trade agreement, how can we try to understand if those movements of public opinion have any effect on the foreign policy decision?
It's quite difficult to measure that, Ivan. What we have been doing, at least for the last 20 years, is try to measure the impact of some specific actor of, for instance, civil society, NGOs. How can they have some impact? How can they relate to policymakers, to decision makers? To what extent actually they take part in reunions, gatherings where strategies are discussed, but measuring public opinion in all and what it represents, it's very difficult to this point, at least. We can consider, for instance, that in some areas, in some issues like environment, human rights, Itamaraty, for the last 20 years at least, is more inclined to listen to some demands, listen to some preferences. Some reports that are produced by Itamaraty, they are produced after listening to those social actors, but this is different than public opinion. This is society, this is some actors with their interests, with their issues, groups of interest, lobbies. The same we can talk about Mercosur. In Mercosur, we have a lot of social actors that take part in some reunions, summits. They can express their worries, their preference, and some of those preference may be taken into account in order to produce some new decision in Mercosur and stuff. But measuring public opinion is still a big challenge for us, for anyone who works with Brazilian foreign policy, at least for the time being.
Okay, we have to finish our seminar. Oh, sorry. Oh, I have to finish our seminar, and everyone is invited to next seminar, Global Health and BRICS, but we will have a 10 minutes break. And I would like to thank Ivan and Paulo for incredible lectures, all participants, and all Gebrex members who have worked hard for months to achieve this 50 conference. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you, Vinicius. It was a great pleasure to be here. Thank you, Ivan, for our discussion. Bye-bye.
Pleasure.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Valeu.